Imagine it's flu season, and you wake up one morning to find out that half the country's vaccine supply is just gone. Poof! This isn't a movie plot. This was the shocking reality back in 2004. Today, we're going to unpack how one tiny contamination problem exposed the incredible fragility of a system we all count on.
So, let's set the scene. The fall of 2004 was pure chaos. You had people, as one senator described it, lining up in the dark at 3 in the morning, just hoping to get one of the few available flu shots. The panic was absolutely real and spreading way faster than any virus. So how on earth did a routine flu season completely collapse into a nationwide emergency?
Well, a crisis like this doesn't just happen overnight. It actually started pretty quietly the year before, in 2003, when a company called Chiron bought a big vaccine plant. By August of 2004, they knew they had a contamination problem. And then, boom. On October 5th, British regulators drop a bombshell and suspend the plant's license. That set off a chain reaction that ricocheted all the way across the Atlantic.
Okay, let's start with the immediate impact, because this wasn't just some minor delay or a small disruption. This was a catastrophic failure that literally wiped out half of the entire country's flu vaccine supply.
I mean, the scale of this problem is just staggering. Public health officials were planning for about 100 million doses to get us through the flu season. But because of this one failure at the Chiron plant, that number plummeted to just 55 million. The country was left completely scrambling.
45%. Think about that for a second. In an instant, nearly half of the expected flu vaccine for the entire United States was just gone. This single point of failure didn't just cause a shortage, it triggered a massive public health crisis and laid bare just how vulnerable the whole system really was.
So, the big question is how? How did this happen? Well, the investigation traced the entire crisis all the way back to one factory in Liverpool, England, and one single, devastating problem: contamination.
Yeah, at the very heart of all this was bacterial contamination. This wasn't a shipping issue or a simple delay. We're talking about actual bacteria being found inside the vaccine itself. That made entire batches totally unsafe and completely unusable.
And that discovery set off this regulatory domino effect. First, Chiron told the British regulators about the issue. But the British authorities basically said, if some batches are bad, we can't be sure any of them are good. So they shut the whole plant down. Then, the US FDA sent their own people, who confirmed everything. The final verdict? Not a single dose from that Chiron plant was safe enough to reach America.
Now, this is where the story gets even more complicated. You have to look at how the company, Chiron, actually handled the situation. Because there was this massive, and I mean massive gap between what they were saying publicly and what regulators were actually finding.
So, the day after the plant was shut down, Chiron's CEO, Howard Pien, goes public and says the company was completely blindsided by this. He called the decision completely unexpected and even claimed that Chiron's own tests showed the vaccine was perfectly safe. This painted a picture of a company that was being unfairly targeted.
But that picture just crumbled. Less than 2 weeks later, the FDA finished their own independent inspection, and guess what? They completely backed up the British decision. They, too, found clear evidence of bacterial contamination, which totally contradicted what the CEO had claimed and raised some very serious questions about what management really knew and when they knew it.
So you might be thinking, okay, that was 20 years ago. Why are we still talking about this? Well, because this wasn't just a case of one company's bad luck. The 2004 crisis was a huge wake-up call that exposed these deep, dangerous flaws in our entire vaccine supply chain. You know, as one epidemiologist, Dr. Matthew Carter, testified at the time, this crisis was long in the making. Public health experts had actually been warning for years that the whole system was basically a house of cards, just waiting for one gust of wind to knock it all down. In 2004, that gust finally arrived. And that fragile system rested on a few really big weaknesses. For one, the market was brittle. The US was relying on just 2 companies for its entire supply. Why? Well, making flu vaccines just wasn't very profitable, so nobody else wanted in. On top of that, the production technology was old and slow. And maybe worst of all, health officials were flying blind. They had no real idea where the vaccine supply was in the private sector. And the numbers really tell the story here. In 1994, there were 6 manufacturers supplying the US market. A decade later, by 2004, that number had dropped to just 2. The country had, as one official warned, put all its eggs in just a couple of baskets.
And look, this wasn't some abstract problem. It had a deeply human cost. The health commissioner of Connecticut, Robert Galvin, shared this really personal story about his own brother who was going through chemo and desperately needed that vaccine. His fear was so raw. The weakest people, the ones who needed protection the most, were the very same people who couldn't endure the chaos of waiting in line for hours.
Ultimately, the 2004 flu shot crisis was a painful but honestly a necessary wake-up call. It forced a huge national conversation about our public health infrastructure and sparked real changes in everything from how we incentivize production to how we track and distribute vaccines.
But it leaves us with this one critical question. We learned a really hard lesson 2 decades ago about having a fragile supply chain. Have we actually done enough since then to make sure something like this can't happen again? It's a question that is absolutely worth considering.